Jana Vallabha Jai Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Jai Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jai Jai Yashodanandana Jai Vrajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jai Yashodanandana Jai Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Jai Vraja Jana Ranjana Jai Yamuna Tiravanachare Jai Kunja Vihare Jai Yamuna Tiravanachare Jai Kunja Vihare Jai Yamuna Tiravanachare Jai Kunja Vihare Yamuna Tiravanachare Jai Kunja Vihare Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Vihare Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Vihare Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Jai Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Jai Girivaradhari Jai Yashodanandana Jai Vraja Jana Ranjana Jai Yashodanandana Jai Vraja Jana Ranjana Jai Yamuna Tiravanachare Jai Kunja Vihare Yamuna Tiravanachare Jai Kunja Vihare Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihare Madhava Jai Kunja Bihare Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunja Bihare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Reading from Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6th, Chapter 1st, chapter entitled The History of the Life of Ajamil, text 13-14. Tapasa brahmacharyena Shamena cha damena cha Tyagena satya shauchabhyam Yamena niyamena va Dehavag buddhijam dhira Dharmadhnya shraddhayanvitaha Kshipayanti agham mahadapi Venu gulma vivanalaha Tapasa brahmacharyena Shamena cha damena cha Tyagena satya shauchabhyam Yamena niyamena va Dehavag buddhijam dhira Dharmadhnya shraddhayanvitaha Kshipayanti agham mahadapi Venu gulmamivanalaha Tapasa brahmacharyena Shamena cha damena cha Tyagena satya shauchabhyam Yamena niyamena va Dehavag buddhijam dhira Dharmadhnya shraddhayanvitaha Kshipayanti agham mahadapi Venu gulmamivanalaha Tapasa brahmacharyena Shamena cha damena cha Tyagena satya shauchabhyam Yamena niyamena va Dehavag buddhijam dhira Dharmadhnya shraddhayanvita Kshipayanti aham mahadapi Venu gulmamivanalaha Tapasa brahmacharyena Shamena cha damena cha Tyagena satya shauchabhyam Yamena niyamena va Dehavag buddhijam dhira Dharmadhnya shraddhayanvitaha Kshipayanti agam mahadapi Venu gulmamivanalaha. Matajis. Word for word meaning. Tapasa, by austerity or voluntary rejection of material enjoyment. Brahmacharyena, by celibacy, the first austerity. Shamena, by controlling the mind. Cha, and. Damena, by fully controlling the senses. cha also, tyagena by voluntarily giving charity to good causes, satya by truthfulness, shauchabhyam and by following regulative principles to keep oneself internally and externally clean, yamena by avoiding cursing and violence, niyamena by regularly chanting the holy name of the Lord, va and dehavag buddhijam performed by the body, words and intelligence, dhiraha those who are sober, dharmadhyaha fully imbued with knowledge of religious principles, shraddhaya anvitaha endowed with faith, kshipanti destroy, agham all kinds of sinful activities, mahadapi although very great and abominable, venugulmam the dried creepers beneath a bamboo tree, eva like, analaha fire. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. To concentrate the mind, one must observe a life of celibacy and not fall down. One must undergo the austerity of voluntarily giving up sense enjoyment. One must then control the mind and senses, give charity, be truthful, clean and non-violent, follow the regulative principles, and regularly chant the holy name of the Lord. Thus, a sober and faithful person who knows the religious principles is temporarily purified of all sins performed with his body, words, and mind. These sins are like the dried leaves of creepers beneath a bamboo tree, which may be burned by fire, although their roots remain to grow again at the first opportunity. Purport. Tapaha is explained in the Smriti Shastra as follows. Manasas chendriyanam cha aikagryam paramam tapaha. Complete control of the mind and senses and their complete concentration on one kind of activity is called tapaha. Our Krishna consciousness movement is teaching people how to concentrate the mind on devotional service. This is first class tapaha. Brahmacharya, the life of celibacy, has 8 aspects. One should not think of women, speak about sex life, dally with women, look lustfully at women, talk intimately with women, or decide to engage in sexual intercourse, nor should one endeavor for sex life or engage in sex life. One should not even think of women or look at them, to say nothing of talking with them. This is called first class brahmacharya. If a brahmachari or sannyasi talks with a woman in a secluded place, naturally there will be a possibility of sex life without anyone's knowledge. Therefore, a complete brahmachari practices just the opposite. If one is a perfect brahmachari, he can very easily control the mind and senses, give charity, speak truthfully, and so forth. To begin, however, one must control the tongue and the process of eating. In the Bhakti Marga, the path of devotional service, one must strictly follow the regulative principles of first controlling the tongue. Sevon mukhehi jihvado swayam eva sfuratyadaha. The tongue, jihva, can be controlled if one chants the HareKrishna Maha Mantra, does not speak of any subject other than those concerning Krishna, and does not take anything not offered, and does not test anything not offered to Krishna. If one can control the tongue in this way, brahmacharya and other purifying processes will automatically follow. It will be explained in the next verse that the path of devotional service is completely perfect and is therefore superior to the path of fruitive activities and the path of knowledge. Quoting from the Vedas, Srila Veera Raghava Acharya explains that austerity involves observing fast as fully as possible. Tapasa na shakena. Srila Rupa Goswami has also advised that atyahara, too much eating, is an impediment to advancement in spiritual life. Also, in Bhagavad Gita 6:17, Krishna says, Yuktahara viharasya yukta cheshtasya karmasu yukta swapnavabodhasya yogo bhavati dukkhaha. He who is temperate in his habits of eating, sleeping, working, and recreation can mitigate all material pains by practicing the yoga system. In text 14 and word dhira, meaning those who are undisturbed under all circumstances, is very significant. Krishna tells Arjun in Bhagavad Gita 2:14, Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkhadaha agamapayino nityas tam stitikshasva bharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance and happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O Scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. In material life, there are many disturbances, adhyatmika, adhidaivika, and adhibhautika. One who has learned to tolerate these disturbances under all circumstances is called dhira. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayamrupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitanscha Namaha Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Krupa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Seek blessings from all the devotees. Jai Shri Radha Vrindavan Chandra Bhagwan ki Jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Baldev Subhadra Maiya ki Jai. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai Chandra Bhagwan ki Jai. Seek blessings of all the devotees before beginning. Very intense verse and purport. I am perspiring reading the purport. So, but I sometimes wonder whether Yugal Shyamrupa chooses the purports and gives to individuals, at least for me. And when I see that, I realize he typically gives something that I need to work upon and am poor at. So, if he's planning that, then that's good. And if he's not planning, then the Lord is planning. That the Lord wants me to study something and present something that I'm poor at, so that it will help me to be better in service to Guru and Krishna. So, we just completed 5th canto. The topics of fifth canto have been Visarga and Poshanam, Sthanam. So Atra Sargo Visargascha. So Visarga and Sthanam are the two topics of fifth canto. The secondary creation and the constitution of the entire cosmic creation and their positioning. And post that, the topic for sixth canto is Poshanam. Poshanam means protection, literally, and also includes the aspect of nourishment. This topic itself is so enlivening and hope-giving. When you talk about Poshanam, Poshanam means protection. So everything that we are discussing as a part of sixth canto, the theme is Poshanam, the protection of a devotee by the Lord. It is so nourishing, it is so hope-giving, because typically the practice of spiritual life is not walking on the bed of roses. Typically it will be Kshurasya dhara nishita durashaya. But despite that, the Lord is protecting. And that feeling is so nourishing and soothing. Like a small child, we sometimes see the parents are more concerned about the protection and nourishment. We can see the mothers running around after the kids, feeding them, sometimes the fathers as well, and then ensuring they don't recline against something, they don't fall somewhere. And they are not even aware of what they are doing. They are in their own world, but they are so nicely protected. And sometimes we see even the kids at my home, sometimes when we are traveling, we reach at about 5 o'clock in the morning somewhere, the kids are sleeping on the 3-tier bed in train, and then you have to pick them up, and then you get into the van, and then you come back home, and then you put them on the bed. By all that time, they are fast asleep, and not even aware where they were and where they are picked up, and whether somebody is, kidnapping them or anything. They're just happy. And so peaceful. Otherwise, life can be so much tension. So this is one simple practical exhibition of the tattva of Poshanam, which is on a very gross physical platform also. But this tattva of Poshanam is so soothing and enlivening. And what the child has to do for this? Just needs to agree to remain in the shelter of the parents. Nothing else other than that he or she has to do. And then she is nicely protected and nourished. Physical protection, mental protection, and spiritual further if they are mature parents. So this is the tattva of Poshanam. Similarly, for a devotee, if he agrees to live by the instructions of Guru and Krishna, there is complete protection. And no matter what, in fact, we see this in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the current chapter, further we'll discuss, even if there is a small mistake on the path of practice of devotional service, still the Lord protects. So this topic of sixth canto is so amazing, so nourishing, so soothing for devotees to study and understand it well, which can give a better enthusiasm to practice the Krishna consciousness in more enlivened fashion. As far as this chapter is concerned, we are currently on the third subpart, the third subsection. First section, Parikshit Maharaj asked about when he lists down what all things you described, things like Manvantara, or even the path of salvation, which is Pravrutti Marg and Nivrutti Marg, or even various dynasties. And after saying that, he asked a question, because just recently Shukadeva Goswami has described various hells and the complete positioning of various planets. He's asking, how can the person be saved from these heinous sins, the effects of these sins? When he puts this question in the 6th verse, and the next couple of verses, when Shukadeva Goswami describes, about a dozen verses after that, this is a section of Shukadeva Goswami testing Parikshit Maharaj in answer to his question. So the section going on currently is Shukadeva Goswami testing Parikshit Maharaj. How is he testing? Because he is giving compromised solutions as answer to his question. The first compromised solution he presented in the 7th, 8th verse was the Karmakandic atonement. And the conclusion, obviously given by Parikshit Maharaj, a brilliant devotee of the Lord, is Prayashchittam atho katham. 2 points he made. Prayashchittam atho katham. What kind of atonement is this? Because it is leading one again to the same lowly activities. And manne kunjara shauchavat. And that's why I consider it as the bathing of an elephant who bathes and then immediately puts the dust on his body. And then after saying, when he stood to that test of karmakandic atonement, it is the next further stage that Shukadeva Goswami is presenting in these couple of verses, which is the path of Jnana Kanda and the regulative principles and practices of the path of Jnana Kanda. And listing these principles, what Srila Prabhupada has described so nicely in translation and purport, starting from tapasa, brahmacharyena, shamena cha, damena cha, tyagena, satya, shauchabhyam, yamena niyamena va, and we read from Srila Prabhupada's translation and purport. What do they mean? Towards the end of this verse is a beautiful analogy, Venu gulma mivanalaha. So I remember even in my childhood when we had a small courtyard out of our homes, even those who maintain the courtyards, they know that there's always a tension of uprooting the weeds every now and then. And sometimes you see, they might be there, but they are dried. So then sometimes the owner want to choose a shortcut. They say, ek kadi laga do. And then they put the fire and those weeds will get burnt out. And then they are happy. And after a few days, they say, again those weeds are there, present. Arre, maine to jala diya tha. Jala diya tha, but that's only on the top part. It's only Venu Gulma Mivanalaha. It's only the inside. So this section, the next subsection of the series of discussion between Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit is talking about the path of atonement by Jnana Kanda can give temporary relief to the sins. That's the theme. The path of Jnana Kanda can give temporary relief to the sins performed by an individual, in answer to the question by Shri Parikshit Maharaj. And the previous conclusion of the previous subsection was the path of the path of atonement by karma kand. The karma kandic atonement can give some purification, but may lead to the further sins. And that's why both of them are incompetent. And then after this verse, Parikshit Maharaj, of course I don't want to do the verses or the purport theft for the further verses, but just to give that hint, that after this, Parikshit Maharaj is not asking any question. But Shukadeva Goswami, an intelligent devotee of the Lord, he notices that dissatisfaction on the face of Parikshit Maharaj after this verse. So even this verse is not satisfying. Why? Because of these two incompleteness of these two paths. And then tomorrow onwards, there will be, continuous flow of nectar. Kechit kevalaya bhaktya. It's amazing where the crux and the essence of this 6th canto will start, coming out, start flowing. So, although in one way, this verse is presenting the incompleteness of path of Jnana Kanda or the atonement by Jnana Kanda, Srila Prabhupada has, in a very interesting manner, taken opportunity to describe it in a manner connected to devotional service. He's not here, just presenting incompleteness of austerity or Brahmacharya or control of tongue. He's presenting it in a manner connected to devotional service in a very useful way. Because everything can be connected to devotional service, can be implemented and utilized in devotional service. So Srila Prabhupada made one wonderful statement here. Our Krishna consciousness movement is teaching people how to concentrate the mind on devotional service. And this is in reference to the definition of tapas as given in the Smriti Shastras, which is complete control of the mind and senses and their complete concentration of one kind of activity is called tapaha. But Srila Prabhupada says this tapaha for devotional service, for our Krishna consciousness movement, is to concentrate the mind on devotional service. So concentrating mind of devotional service means the practical aspects, the practices of the regulative principles of devotional service, the principles of devotional service, and to understand it well, to also practice the service to the Lord in practical aspect as well. These are various aspects of devotional service which Srila Prabhupada is talking about. And he says this is teaching people. It's not just presenting the incompleteness of austerity and the further aspects of the Dhyana Kanda. In fact, Srila Prabhupada is presenting very strongly, beginning with the practice of Brahmacharya. He's not just saying, of course, there is a point in that discussion how just empty austerity is incomplete, like Maharaj Kulashekar says. So, aradhito yadi haris tapasa tatakim, naradhito yadi haris tapasa tatakim. Austerity, what can austerity do if one doesn't worship the Lord? And where is the need of the austerity for one who worships the Lord? So certainly devotional service doesn't depend on austerity, but it can be implemented and it can be used to fine-tune devotional service. That's what Srila Prabhupada is describing here. And is very strong in the principle beginning with tapasa and brahmacharya, how it can be practically practiced in various aspects of brahmacharya, and how it is so useful for one to sharpen and fine-tune one's consciousness. And as we see, even the system that is implemented by Srila Prabhupada and subsequently by his bona fide and glorious representatives is even in our movement, it is so practical and possible for practicing brahmacharya. And brahmacharya, by brahmacharya I mean both practicing the order of brahmacharya, the ashram of brahmacharya, and also brahmacharya is required for a person in any walk of life, in any order of life. So for this, there are a few important things for one to be in position to implement this principle of brahmacharya. And a few of them is, first of all, to be a first-class brahmachari, one needs to have examples of good first-class brahmacharis. And we can see that that's available in our scenario, in our movement. Otherwise, at times we see people, they hear about such principles and then they wonder, aisa kidhar dekhne ko milega, they are wondering for some examples. But fortunate are we to have an organization wherein we can find examples of first-class brahmacharis, which is one of the most important thing. The second thing is for practicing a good brahmacharya is a very, very strong, foolproof, profound system. Without a proper system, it is not possible to practice brahmacharya. Because otherwise the person, if he is moving just by the waves, wherever it is taking, it's not possible. But a proper system ensures first-class brahmacharya. And at times that can be little pushy or little chasing on someone or somebody. But still, that's protecting. So the three important requirements for first-class brahmacharya is, first is the good examples, the first-class examples of first-class brahmacharis. The second one is a very strong and profound, well-thought system. And the third one is a very profound process of purification. Without these three, it will not be possible to practice the brahmacharya. And we see by the Lord's blessings and Srila Prabhupada's blessings, how we have all these three in our situation. Because even if one practices the first two, still the person sometimes can fall short. And then what is required in addition to the first two? A very strong and proper process of purification. Because without that, even if one is trying to practice, it may not suffice. And thus, these three we see very thankfully and gratefully present in our case for us to implement and practice this principle of tapas, which is beginning for brahmacharya. Now, addressing the point of brahmacharya, Srila Prabhupada also is talking about controlling the tongue and how subsequently that can help in controlling all other senses. Moving further, Srila Prabhupada also talks about the principle of being dhira, which is translated as being sober. Sober as such, if you see the literal dictionary meaning, the English word sober doesn't much match with the word dhira. But dhira, what is described by Srila Prabhupada in this purport, actually to the point describes the meaning of this word dhira. Talking about austerity, in the principle that Srila Prabhupada has described, connecting it with devotional service is very important than just coming and taking a sword and deriding this principle. We are not talking about austerity in solo. In solo means just autonomous, a single, independent principle of austerity. We're talking about austerity in Krishna consciousness, like Srila Prabhupada said, is concentrate the mind on devotional service. This is the principle. And we see this implemented by so many great Vaishnavas in the past, great devotees of the Lord, like Maharaj Ambarish, Maharaj Rantidev, so many other Rajarshis. What kind of austerities they have practiced? If somebody just says, austerity is Jnana-kanda. No, they just have implemented it, the austerity in devotional service. Moving further, if we take it to the lives of the recent Acharyas, we see the austerities practiced by 6 Goswamis. It's spectacular. People cannot think of, even by Raghunath Das Goswami. And what is the testimony? Testimony is how much Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was pleased on Raghunath Das Goswami. So, Vairagya Vidya Nija Bhakti Yoga, how the Lord is so much pleased by this Vairagya or by austerity, which is one of the important aspects of Vairagya as well. And then even down to the current times, just a few decades ago or a century ago, we saw Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur for 10 years of chanting 192 rounds every single day, sitting in single place. It's a devotional austerity. That's not easy. So we see it being practiced in the lives of so many devotees, Vaishnavas, Acharyas, Rajarshis, because they saw it in relation to devotional service. In fact, I was going through a verse from the episode of when all were gathered at Kurukshetra, and when all the queens and the kings and Krishna and Balaram and so many other people, they had gathered, and there's description how all the great sages arrive at that place. And when the sages arrived, Krishna and Balaram, who were representing all the kings, they come forward and worship the sages and wash their lotus feet and offer them various paraphernalia for worship. And at that moment, Lord Krishna starts speaking, and he says, this is from 84th chapter, 10th canto and 10th verse. He's saying, Kim su alpa tapasam. He begins with that. Lord Krishna is speaking to all the sages after worshipping them at Kurukshetra. And he says, how wonderful it is that such alpa tapasam people like us have got opportunity to take your darshan, to get your darshan, to serve you, to touch your lotus feet, to worship you. And although, of course, Srila Prabhupada hasn't anyways given purport to 84th chapter of 10th canto, but even by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada haven't given any purport to that verse. At the same time, it is so wonderful when Lord Krishna is presenting a principle that for alpa tapasam, it is not possible to get great fortunes, even connected to devotional service. So we can find references in scriptures talking very strictly and strongly about the alpa tapasam people who fail to practice austerity, or who are the people who are very short or very feeble in their practices of austerities. And that is why this principle can be well connected. Even we saw from the instructions of Maharaj Rishabhadev, Tapo divyam putrakayena sattvam shuddhyeta tasmat brahma saukyam tvanantam. He mentioned how it is important. In fact, it is the principle, it is the goal of the human life to practice this Tapo divyam. And in a very proper way, he called out this word divyam there. It's a transcendental austerity and not just austerity, which is more relevant and which can purify a person. And moving further on this path of alpa tapasam or the austerity, there is a lot of descriptions and which gives a devotee a principle or a guideline to implement this tapo divyam, or as Srila Prabhupada has said, austerity in Krishna consciousness, as we see from the lives of so many acharyas. The next person, the next principle further described is dhira, as we mentioned, and Srila Prabhupada says, being undisturbed in all situations, undisturbed to the provoking situations. The life is filled with provoking situations. Provoking situations can be to the body, first of all, to the senses, to the mind, the different provoking situations, and stand in all of them is what is dhira. To the body means what is described by this matra sparshastu kaunteya, shitoshna sukha dukkhada. So sometimes you are perspiring, sometimes you are shivering. So this is the bodily inconvenience or bodily provoking situations. Sometimes provoking situations to the senses, the sense objects, and one is tempted, one falls to the cravings of the senses. And then next is the provoking situations to the mind. It can be provoking situations to the mind in the sense one is challenged in one's conceptions. one's position is at stake or is threatened. At least one thinks like that, nobody's position is threatened, but the mind makes one think that, oh, my position is threatened. So typically, the world is always so busy. I always like to tell, some of the ladies at home, don't worry so much about what people are thinking about you. And after looking at you, people are so busy in their own world. Nobody is busy thinking about you. People are so busy about thinking of themselves. But typically mind makes one think that what he or she or others are thinking about me, and it's so much of excessive, overwhelming absorption in one's own consciousness, which makes one think that, oh, my position is at stake. So mind may make one think these are different situations which are provoking situations or the disturbing situations to the mind as well. And it is so important to stand to that. And typically we can see responses if one is not a dhira or sober. What could be the responses to such provoking situations is one may explode. We can see to the worst case, one may explode, one may lose temper, one may get into justifications, one may get into being critical of others or somebody, because then if one's position is at stake, or the person imagines that it is at stake, then it can go to any level of such responding in these different manners. And that's why this is called reacting versus reaction versus reacting versus responding. So reaction is something, which person without control loses temper and just acts as per the dictation of the conditioning. But responding means actually acting in what should be done. So that's an important part of being sober. Not doing the easy thing, but doing the right thing. So I was recently hearing a devotee, he was glorifying other devotee, and he said, I have seen him, he always practices to do the right thing, not to do the easy thing. Typically, we can tend to take the path of least resistance, which is tending to do the easy thing. But being sober, being dhira, means practicing intentfully with regulative practice, with one's discretion and determination. Practice to do the right thing, not just the easy thing. And the right thing means what should be the right response to that particular situation. And being mindful of this will help a person to be better sober. Sometimes we have different conceptions and practices, experience, because of which we may tend to respond in particular manner or being little reactive. But being mindful of some of the principles of devotional service can help us to be careful and to learn to be better responsive in provoking situations. I was hearing about a king, very interesting story, and this king had a very unique practice. Whenever he defeated anyone, he would put one memory of that on his helmet, on his crown, as they say, feather on the cap. So he would put one memorial, kind of medal on his helmet, on his crown, and he would also put one kind of memory of the same on his armor on the chest. And everyone would see that so many medals and so many victories he had. And on his head as well, or when somebody saw him closely, on his armor as well. And it was quite gorgeous to see that whenever somebody saw, holding so many medals and on the chest and on the head. And because of that, he kind of got very egoistic and very strong and very full of pride. So nobody could question him, and he started doing some wrong things. So obviously, people wanted that somebody should teach him a lesson. But who will do that? Because his one blow was enough to destroy a person. It was so powerful. And that's why nobody ventured. Everyone just blindly followed somehow, out of no other choice. And once there was a very thin, skinny man sitting in the midst of his way, where he would pass every day. And this fellow, he didn't get up. Everyone was bowing down. But this fellow was reading something. He continued reading that. Skinny fellow. And this king got annoyed. Hey, how come he's not responding? And then the king, ordered his servants, and he said, call him here. I want to, just scold him. And then this fellow said, "Oh, you are scolding me? Why are you scolding me? I'm sitting." He said, "No, you don't understand. I'm so powerful." He said, "Who says you are powerful?" And then he said, "Oh, if you think I'm not powerful, then let's have a combat." "Okay, if you want, let's have a combat." And everyone was laughing. He said, "Gaya kaam se," this fellow, with the one blow, this fellow will be thrown far away. And then he started. And then they arranged an arena and moving around. And the king with all his crowns and medals and armor. And they started. And the king started approaching toward this fellow. This fellow, skinny fellow, his body was very kind of gymnastic and very flexible body. He just slipped from his grip, from the king's grip, and he went to the other side. And then it was a big arena. And then the king came walking towards him. Again, put him in his grip and about to blow him. And again that fellow slipped. So like that, he started slipping from the grip, moving around. And what he would do is, as soon as he slipped, he would go from one area to the another. This is the area, he would go from here to here. The king would come walking. And then he would go there. And it kept on. And after about half an hour, he saw that the king just collapsed on the ground. What was the reason? The reason was burden of the medals on his head and on his chest. Because this fellow, he knew very well, this fellow, this pride king, he carries so much of weight on his head and chest. It's a weight of his victories. The weight of his victories carrying, that itself would destroy him. The only thing I need to take care is, I shouldn't have to face a single blow of his hand on my body. If I just ensure that, if I keep slipping and keep moving him, just his movement with the heavy burden will destroy him. And he was careful in that. So, this is a very instructive story which describes that how we have to be careful not to burden ourselves with the weight of our victories. Of course, a devotee never thinks that, he is victorious, or the weight of the successes. So, a devotee is never thinking that he owns, but if at all there are any successes or victories, let's not carry the burden of the victories and successes, which ultimately what they do? They destroy us. The burden of victories and successes, if we think that owes to us and we are responsible for that burden can destroy. Like this king. To defeat that king, nothing had to be done. Only his own movements defeated him because of the burden of his victories. Similarly, in our responses, if we are carrying great burdens of various previous things that we have done or somebody has done, then it can lead to defeats. Just by that own self. Nobody has to come and defeat. Nobody has to defeat. We ourselves can defeat ourselves. And that's why it's called instruments. I'd like to close with this one very, especially when it comes to an organization like ISKCON, where we call ourselves as instruments. So being instrument is a very interesting word because we can become instruments to give a better experience to individuals. Like one good person was saying to other who was very proud of his house. He said, "You may have a good house, but I have a better home because here everyone feels welcomed." So similarly for this movement, which Srila Prabhupada called as I build a home where entire world can stay, it's our responsibility to make sure that we respond to situations in a way it can be in such a way by which everyone can feel welcomed here and not repelled from here. And then we can become better instruments. So instrument is a very interesting word. So if you see in the instruments, typically we have this practice of calibrating the instruments, because if the instruments are not calibrated, then they can give wrong readings. And that's why many standards, there are many strict standards, national and international standards of calibration. Very strict standards actually. Every few days you have to calibrate the instrument, because instruments are benchmarks of gauging and measurements. So if they are benchmarks, how much careful they have to be. So the standards exercise very strong standards on practices on their calibration. And otherwise what can happen is they can give the wrong direction. So, and what is calibration? Calibration is nothing but you have to bring them close to another precision instrument. And then with that, you have to match it, align with it, and then it is calibrated, it can be used. So if we consider ourselves as instruments, it's also worthwhile to consider calibrating ourselves, recalibrating every now and then. Otherwise, what can happen is, we have a great responsibility because we are connections between Srila Prabhupada's movement and society, and thus there can be mishaps or disservices from the instruments, and that's why it's important. There was a great saint, he had a practice, he would always call, his name was Shiva. I don't know to get into depth of that story, but he had a practice, he was a Maharaj, and he would sit in his cave and his disciples would be practicing and serving in the outside of the cave. And you would hear the sound shouting, "Shiva, where are you?" And then he would say sometimes, yes, I am here. He only would answer, So, and then the disciples would ask him later, Maharaj, why did you say that? We always see. He said, yeah, because at times I realize, although I'm sitting here for meditating on the Lord, my mind goes somewhere else, so I always like to shout myself, and when I say, yes, I am here, then, it brings me and on the right platform. So many times it's worthwhile, contemplating on where we are, why we are, what for we are, what's the goal, and what should we be doing. And that can be a good recalibration of the instruments, which is in line with what Srila Prabhupada has described us to focus completely on devotional service and utilize our mind and senses for that purpose, and being sober, and utilize all of this to practice devotional service, which can certainly keep us in a better position to please Guru and Krishna more, which is the sum and substance of the practice of devotional service. Thank you. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Samaved Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Seek your pardon for little delay. Thank you. Hare Krishna.